back to the White House today as both leaders confront the question of whether additional military action against Iran is becoming unavoidable. President Trump has continued to leave the door open for diplomacy, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it increasingly clear that he believes Iran's nuclear threat will not truly end until the regime is either forced to abandon its nuclear program or they lose the ability to continue it altogether. The president has remained equally consistent on one point. The world's leading state sponsor of terrorism must never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon. But beneath the diplomacy and the headlines, the battlefield itself continues to evolve. Iran's proxies have opened yet another front. After Iran-backed Houthi militants attacked Saudi oil tankers and threatened commercial shipping through the Red Sea, Saudi Arabia launched airstrikes against Houthi military targets. At the same time, Ukraine says it struck an Iranian cargo vessel in the Caspian Sea. They were carrying missile and drone components bound for Tehran. It underscores just how interconnected today's conflicts have become. What once appeared to be separate wars are increasingly beginning to look like a single expanding theater. It stretches all the way from Eastern Europe to the Persian Gulf. So where does this confrontation go from here? Are we on the cusp of a broader military campaign against Iran, led by the United States and Israel? Could Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates find themselves moving into an even closer strategic alignment with Israel and the U.S.? Well, every time we think now we can make peace with Iran, it's a slippery slope. Because to have a legitimate peace deal, you must have people of integrity with which to negotiate. And Iran, they just don't meet that standard. Any expectations that the Islamic regime would keep their word is simply absurd. Iran is a state sponsor of terror. They have poured billions of dollars into Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're terrorist organizations, instruments of destruction, trained and armed to attack Israel and to massacre innocent people. And now Iran has activated the Houthis in Yemen, who are Iran's last remaining proxy that's still somewhat viable. So while on the one hand, Iran is saying they want to negotiate with the U.S., they also sent military leaders to meet with the Houthis, and shortly afterwards, the Houthis started attacking. It's not a surprise. It's Iran. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. They delay and they stall. There's an old fable about a scorpion that talks a frog into taking it across the creek. The scorpion promises the frog not to sting him if he'll help with transport. When they get to the other side, the scorpion stings the frog. And the frog says, "Why would you do that?" And he responded, "Because I'm a scorpion." Wherever Islam is the primary political influence, it's anything but tolerant. And it isn't typically peaceful. It's oppressive. I'm grateful for the bold and courageous approach being taken by this administration in confronting evil. The United States stepped into a direct confrontation with Iran, and they should be applauded for that. Confronting the Iranian regime was not the safest political option, but there are moments when leaders must choose between prioritizing the next election and protecting the next generation. History reminds us that confronting evil, it's never been easy, but it has always required courageous leadership. Few Americans understand that better than Commander Kirk Lippold, who is our guest today. As commanding officer of the USS Cole, he faced one of al-Qaeda's deadliest attacks before 9/11. Suicide terrorists detonated an explosive alongside his ship in Aden, Yemen, killing 17 sailors and wounding 37. In the chaos, Lippold immediately secured the perimeter, conducted damage control, and directed an effective medical response. He led his crew through more than 96 hours of relentless efforts that ultimately saved the destroyer from sinking. After 19 days of work in extreme heat and remarkable stress, he led his ship out of Aden, Yemen, and prepared it for the transit back to the United States. His leadership under unimaginable pressure, he earned the Legion of Merit Award. The necessity of great leaders in the midst of difficult times is just not restricted to the battlefield. We need great leaders to flourish in our communities and in the public square. It's time that we lead with kingdom greatness. It's available to all of us. You don't have to be a person with a great following. Jesus established different metrics for greatness. In Scripture, we are told of a moment when Jesus' disciples were having a heated discussion. They weren't debating Scripture or a parable that Jesus had told. No, they were arguing about which of them was the greatest. I imagine Jesus was somewhat disappointed by their rather petty behavior, but he simply reminded them that he had given them a new definition of success. He knew that having true significance in God's kingdom means not ruling from a throne, but serving. Servant leadership is the willingness and intention to serve others with love and humility. That should be a goal for all of us. It's not easy. We may never master it completely, but it's an important characteristic for every follower of Jesus to pursue. Let's ask the Lord to help us follow his example and to serve our families and communities with a true servant's heart. We might all honor him all of our days in that way. Well, in a moment, we'll be joined by someone who understands how America's adversaries think. Commander Kirk Lippold joins us next. I'll be right back. Well, tonight we're joined by retired U.S. Navy Commander Kirk Lippold. Welcome to the show, Commander.
Thank you very much. Glad to be on again.
Well, we've just seen 13 consecutive nights where we took military action on Iran again. Now it's been interrupted for 3 or 4 days while the president hopes to negotiate. Can you give us your assessment of where we are in this unfolding conflict?
Well, I think what you're really saying is hope springs eternal. I think President Trump is trying to give the Iranians one last chance because we are continuing to flow a number of combat forces into the region throughout the Middle East and in other countries, so that if Iran does not come to the negotiating table in good faith, President Trump is prepared to and has the necessary combat force culminating at a key point in time of his choosing to be able to strike Iran to hopefully end this thing once and for all, take down the IRGC, and ensure that Iran can make that transition into a responsible international player and hopefully a democracy.
Well, President Trump seems to have demonstrated a determined patience to find an agreement with Iran. There's a whole set of voices on the other side that says there's no chance of that, and it's going to require a complete victory over them. Do you still hold out hope that there's a negotiation or that we can negotiate with them?
I think that when you look at the analysis just in the short term of the last few months, plus their track record over 47 years, I hold little hope that Iran is ever going to come to the negotiating table in good faith. Every agreement that they have signed up to, whether it was the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, which impacts the Strait of Hormuz, whether it was the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which, oh, by the way, was signed by nations other than the United States, even though we withdrew, they still had an obligation to obey. Iran has broken each of those agreements. So clearly they have a track record of not only living up to their international commitments, they have used the Middle East as their kind of revolutionary, terrorist-based regime that has destabilized not only the Middle East, but the world in general. They use proxy forces to try and maintain power, and they clearly are not interested in peace. They are interested in trying to foment a revolution that started in 1979 and still continues today.
Well, you mentioned their proxy forces. Hamas and Hezbollah have been significantly weakened and removed as real threats. Senator Cory Booker had an opinion on Iran. I want you to listen, then I have a question.
Iran is, because of that, Iran has more leverage, more power on the world stage. Not only did he not devastate Iran, Iran is in a stronger position today in terms of that kind of leverage than they were before. And what is Donald Trump doing? He's doubling down on a failed war by increasing attacks this week and still has no way out of this morass.
The good senator seems to be able to find a cloud behind every silver lining. Well, I don't understand even what he's saying. The proxies have been weakened. Iran is weakened. Do you understand his perspective?
I actually do not. What I do understand is that when you look at the Democrats today, and believe it or not, there are even some Republicans, they want President Trump to fail. They despise him so much that they are willing to risk U.S. national security interests abroad and even here at home to see him fail in this conflict with Iran to make sure that they cannot get a nuclear weapon. Because if he succeeds, that would be a victory for Trump, President Trump, and his administration. If he fails, he joins a long line of failed Democrats, including Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. They want him to join that crowd. So when Senator Booker says stuff like that, it is actually irresponsible and undermines the president, which undermines our national security. So, in my opinion, those who do not want us to achieve the stated goals, no nuclear program, limits to a ballistic missile program, no support for Houthis, and the Strait of Hormuz as an international waterway, those people actually are undermining U.S. national security, and they, in fact, should be ashamed of what they're doing.
With your extensive experience, can you help us understand what it really means to finish this job? What should we be looking for?
I think the number one thing that you have to look at, Reverend, is when you are looking at what the United States needs to achieve here, it is primarily that we need to get the Iranian Republican Guard Corps, IRGC, along with their internal security force, the Basij, to realize that they can't project power out from Iran, nor can they maintain it internal as well. That's what culminating this large amount of combat power is eventually going to threaten them with. Because at the end of the day, Iran needs to come to the negotiating table, and the U.S. representing the world, and especially Europe, which has proven themselves to be weak and feckless and will not stand up and help us the way they need to, is going to demonstrate that we are still the world's leader and that we are going to be that shining beacon on the hill. We are going to need to destroy the infrastructure that allows them to sustain themselves. That is going to include dual-use targets, bridges, railheads, roads that allow the IRGC to maintain power and resupply. And if that means that we begin to strike like we have, railway bridges over the link coming from China or coming from the Caspian Sea, so be it. Because the United States is going to have to take down the IRGC to a point where they are no longer combat effective, even within their own country. That's what's going to create the conditions that were stated at the very beginning and have kind of fallen off the table a little bit. That the Iranian people still have that golden opportunity, a once-in-a-generation opportunity, like President Trump said, to really take control of the government and assume and create their own destiny. So that's what I think we're still hopeful for and working toward. And I think President Trump is proceeding to do that in a very crystallized way. But again, those people like Senator Booker, Senator Warner from Virginia, they seek to undermine the president because they want him to fail, to join that list of failed presidents before him.
Well, I want to explore that a bit more when we come back from the break. We need to take a short moment. Hope you'll stay with us for another segment.
Absolutely.
Well, we're back now with National Security Analyst Commander Kirk. I have a question, Commander. The Strait of Hormuz is a talking point, it seems like, every evening in the news. We understand how much of the world's oil flows through that channel, but it's been extraordinarily difficult to establish control and to maintain. Can you help us understand that a bit? What makes that? I understand strategically why it's important. What makes the challenge of the security of that?
Well, the big challenge is that even though President Trump has stated, and in fact the Secretary of War has confirmed, we've destroyed their Air Force, their Army, and their Navy. The bottom line is, if you can project power offshore, which means drones or these missiles that they're firing, let's face it, the insurance industry and the owners of those ships that are still in the Persian Gulf trying to go through the Strait of Hormuz, they're not going to risk going through. And so consequently, Iran, even using the information warfare domain to say that they are controlling the strait, they in fact are exercising control. President Trump and I know Secretary of War Hegseth have both said, we control the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, and unfortunately, that's not the case, because if Iran can exercise influence on shipping traffic, they're still in control of that domain, and we need to make sure that we destroy that capability so that we can get those through. Europe has a number of minesweepers. Where are they? Why aren't they projected to go into the region to be able to help us demine the strait to ensure that it is in fact safe? So here again, we have an opportunity for our allies in the region. By the same token, Iran has attacked the small allies, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar. They haven't attacked the big guys. They haven't attacked Saudi Arabia directly. They haven't attacked Oman or the United Arab Emirates directly. They are letting their proxy forces from Iraq try and shoot them. So what Iran is doing is they are doing a gradual escalation, and that is what is preventing the United States from getting the other countries who have to live with Iran in their backyard from being participants to be able to strike where we need them to.
It seems to me they may be playing the long game, maybe better than us, extending negotiations, keeping the talks going, never having any intention of capitulating, hoping that the midterm elections will bring a change in the balance of power and they'll be safe again. Am I misreading that?
I would tend to think that time does not benefit anyone but Iran. If Iran can delay things either through negotiations or otherwise, we should in fact give them an opportunity to come to the table in good faith. The split second that they demonstrate they're not doing it in good faith, or they're trying to draw this out, as you astutely observed, because of the midterm elections and they think the balance of power may change, then the bottom line is going to be we walk away and strike them hard. The United States at this point has no choice. We as a nation have made the commitment to go in there. The president is responsible for our national security. We are not in a war. A war means you mobilize the resources of a nation in order to confront an existential threat to the existence of our country. We are not at war in Iran. We are involved in a conflict, and that is a very, very key constitutional point that I think is lost on many people. The other point that I'll make, Israel is not driving this. Israel, in fact, was engaged in the initial strikes, have stood back, and while President Netanyahu obviously feels that or Prime Minister Netanyahu obviously feels that Israel has national security interests involved, the U.S. is still the driver here, and President Trump is in charge of this entire event.
Those are good clarifications. So what's a realistic timeline for completing this conflict, bringing a resolution to it?
I honestly believe that it is going to take anywhere from 4 to 6 months before we finally create the conditions necessary. It is going to take longer than we thought. It's not like Iraq, where we're going to go in and not prepare for post-combat operations. One of the benefits that we have with it when it comes to the conflict in Iran is if we can eliminate the IRGC and besieged force to exercise power externally and, more importantly, internally, then we're going to create those conditions. Iran is one of the most educated countries in the Middle East outside of Israel. So at the end of the day, those technocrats who could step into government positions to be able to allow them to run their own government, to run their economy, to build their future, actually exist today. Would they need help doing that? Absolutely. You've got the United States, you have France, you have the UK who could help us do that, but we need to make sure that we create those conditions first. We're making strides in that effort, but I think as I observed earlier, the building up of forces is what is going to be the driver and determining factor for President Trump, and I think he's going to wait until the time and conditions are on our side, not the Iranians, before he strikes.
Well, President Trump is set to meet with Zelensky this week. When Zelensky travels to D.C., the Ukrainians struck a ship in the Caspian Sea towards Iran. Are you concerned about an expansion of this conflict?
I think there is ample opportunity, unfortunately, for that to happen. What is going on, for example, is that every Shahed drone that flies with a Chinese-made engine. The missiles that are coming in from Russia, as far as I'm concerned, those are legitimate targets as well for the U.S. because they're supporting the regime. China is watching how the United States is working in the Strait of Hormuz. If you look at the militarized islands throughout the South China Sea, if you look at what they are supplying to Iran as far as intelligence, targeting information, those engines for the drones, as I mentioned, they are playing a long game where Iran and Russia are China's proxies in a strategic game. The bottom line is China is an enemy of the United States today. And while we cannot immediately decouple our economy, the American people had better start taking a hard look and understanding the larger global picture. Disengagement will not work, but confronting China is going to have to occur at some point, and our allies out there in the South China Sea are going to be hand in glove with us when we go to do that, especially Japan and Australia.
Commander, thank you for your service to our country, but more importantly for the insights you've given us today. It's helpful.
Thank you very much. Honor to be on again.
In a moment, I'll be back with your emails.